The subject of Math 221, aka Calculus 1, is functions with one real variable. Do you know enough about functions? Let's do a problem together. Okay, here's the question. Do you know the domain and range of arcsine and arctangent? Let's talk about arcsine first. It is the inverse function of sine x restricted on certain domain. In order to remember the restriction of the domain, we need to have a sense of what sine x look like. Let's graph it. Sine x is this wave oscillating between 1 and -1. I remember sine 0 is of 0. The period of sine is 2 pi. So half of the period would be pi, and half of that would be pi over 2. Sine x is not 1 to 1. It does not have an inverse function. We need the part of sine of x that is 1 to 1. That means we need the part of the graph that is either monotonically decreasing or monotonically increasing. And also we want to take the part that is around the origin. So the biggest increasing chunk that we can take from sine of x is from negative pi over 2 to pi over 2. So arcsine of x is the inverse function of sine of x restricted on domain negative pi over 2 to pi over 2. With this restriction, the range of sine of x is still from -1 to 1. So to get the inverse function of sine in this sense, we just need to reverse the direction of the arrow. So it is clear that the domain of arcsine is the interval -1 to 1, and the range is the interval negative pi over 2 to pi over 2. Now let's do the same for arctan of x, which is the inverse function of tangent of x restricted on certain domain. In order to understand arctangent of x, we want to graph tangent of x first. And I need a few facts to record the graph of tangent of x. For an acute angle x, tangent of x can be defined by opposite over adjacent side of a right triangle. Then by looking at the right triangle, I remember tangent of 0 is 0, tangent of 45 degree is 1, and tangent of 90 degree is positive infinity. Then I remember the graph of tangent of x when x is between 0 and pi over 2. Now the part of tangent of x when x is negative also comes back to me. At this point, you might be thinking, oh, the domain of tangent of x is from negative pi over 2 to pi over 2, and it is monotonically increasing, so it has an inverse function. Well, you're onto something, but the domain of tangent of x is not negative pi over 2 over pi over 2. The truth is, tangent of x is defined for almost all real numbers, except odd multiples of pi over 2, and it has a period of pi. In order to consider the inverse function of tangent of x, we restrict its domain on the interval between negative pi over 2 and pi over 2 on which it is monotonically increasing. In another word, arctan of x is the inverse function of tangent of x restricted on the interval negative pi over 2 to pi over 2. When tangent is restricted in this domain, its range is still all the real numbers. Now if we look at the inverse function of tangent of x with this domain restriction, we conclude that the domain of arctangent of x is all real numbers, and the range is the open interval from negative pi over 2 to pi over 2. Lastly, I want to show you this graph of sine, arcsine, tangent, and arctangent from the textbook. Enjoy.